So what I want to share with you today is an exciting content standard that has its origins within the Elsevier company, but I think the people that were very closely involved took with them a lot of heritage and a lot of publishing experience outside of the company itself. So it's quite an effort that has led to a standard that we believe is appropriate for Elsevier, of course, as a primary user, but has a wider opportunity, and that also shines through in an emerging initiative that there's a working group being formed with NISO to look deeper into this initiative, into this standard, and see what can be done to advance this standard to a more common and more shared initiative to all users and members of NISO. So to me, the honors to kind of break um, the ice a bit and share a journey of how we got to this standard and why we believe the standard is something worth our while, and also something that addresses many um, uh, challenges of today, but potentially also things that are very close around the corner for which we must be prepared. So let's see how we go on that. So if we take a look at Elsevier as a corporate, it's relatively traditional. It has a whole stack of books and databases and webinars and preprints. So they all have their own kind of silo. They have their own brands, and we try to cater for as many people as we can, with the promise that we try and interconnect information. We try to contextualize information, all with the intent to create insight into our content and offer segues into future research that will advance science in at large. So that's a huge undertaking. And as you can imagine, all the journeys that you can expect are usually bespoke. They're very local to a researcher, and therefore the interaction that you want to have with the content is also very delicate and on point and hard to capture in strands of patterns. So if we take that as a very common problem space, we came up with the vision of a data platform. So the data platform in our mind is very much a shared space where many topics and entities reside in a large data pool, and we have our stakeholders that have their own interest into discovering, retrieving, manipulating, and contributing back into the data platform as an ecosystem that continuously develops, grows, extends, learns, and builds as it evolves. So it's quite a dynamic space that we have in mind there. So on the left-hand side, authors, those are always the originating sources, and then in the middle, we are more and more being supported by data scientists and developer squads that all have their own mechanism to interact with data and to combine data with this intent to create insight for the user. And on the right hand side, we have many stakeholders, obviously in the research domain, each having their own interest to data. So we have to understand the profiles that these people are interested in and cater for those profiles. So the bottom line, I think, is it's very much an entity-driven world. So we want to see everything through the lens of an entity, and entities can be anything that you want it to be. So you will immediately be working with domains, domain models that describe your domain, describe what are relevant concepts in your domain, why they are relevant, why they are connected, why they are meaningful, is all part of such domain models. So it's in that sense a very knowledge heavy environment that you have to model. So if you would take that as your vision, then then you go back to a content perspective. So I'm very much a content person, so it's content that drives me. And if you would look at it from a content perspective, you see a number of requirements that always bubble up, and these are the ones that are top of mind. There's many more, so you could fill a 500-page telephone book if you would want. So I'll just limit it to a slide. But what you see is you want to have content quick, fast. You don't want to wait for it until it's ready in a shape that the publisher has decided for you. You want to have it in the way that you want it early. Um, you want to have a role-based handling, so you want the content to behave in the context that you expect from it. It has to appear in a shape that is relevant and makes the proper impact to the work that you're doing, which means not too much and not too little, and exactly right entities pulled together. And even better, you should also have the content knowing what purpose it is trying to accomplish. You should actually be almost knowing what kind of research you're engaged in, what are the objectives of your research that you're after. Somehow should be slowly discoverable and also connectable to the content that you are creating and interconnecting. So that's quite an interesting interaction that can happen there. Another big thing is content being shared. I think every company that is big in data will always claim that having content is one thing, but having it easily shared amongst the group is very hard. So one big thing I want to stress here is a common vocabulary. Everybody that's in the world of connecting huge amounts of data, and I'm sure the group is growing by every day, they should, I think, at one point in time, consider common vocabularies that need to be put in place. Vocabularies that are local and private, but also vocabularies that are general and public, and combining between them. That's very important. Continuous flow and hydration. So those are, of course, terms from the data platform world. So you need to continuously be able to add and be able to step in the stream and grab whatever you need at any moment and not having to wait for any reason. And then, of course, optimization for formats. There are many stakeholders to your platform. You have machine learning devices, you have humans, you have applications, you have storage. So these are all technical devices that each have their preference to eat and manipulate content, and you have to cater for all of them. So you have to be very kind of prepared for that. And the last part is I devote that for the need for extensibility. Small models, nimble models, models that are easy to extend, easily to port from one place to another, not captive to somebody else's standard, but your own standard, if you like. That's really important. Otherwise, you get lock-ins that defeat the whole purpose. So if we look at a company like Elsevier today, it's still the DNA of a traditional publisher, although we advertise we're a data-driven company. The reality is that we still work very much with humans that make manuscripts, and we bring that through a copy edit chain until we end up in a place where we have the finished book or finished article or finished conference proceeding, etc. So this is very linear. It's very human intensive, and for good reasons, because it's high value content. It's important content. It's content that makes a difference at the point of where it gets used. So you have to be very careful to it. But if we'll take a data platform perspective, we want to make a more segmented way of treating it. So we have a standard procedure that is common for many big data companies that all have their own mechanisms to harvest, to normalize, and then get engaged in an extraction and matching exercise until you reach the data in the shape and accuracy that you want. So that's the general pattern that you want to pursue. So somewhere down the line, you have to understand where your traditional workflow maps into these higher order features of a data platform, and you must understand the features of your content to make it happen. So this is the backdrop for content profiles and linked data, linked document standards, the CPLD. And it's so it's the result of adopting this content platform principles, and it's aimed to offer flexibility, extensibility, and connectivity. So these are high order features that we ask for, and those must be in place to make your content and data truly move from your own place to somebody else's place and back again, without losing control and without losing oversight on where things are heading. So that's important. So just before I give a detail into the link, the content profile standard itself, I just want to give two more big concepts that I think are important to take on board, because they do drive the whole ecosystem and the whole rationale as to why you would have to consider something like content profiles and linked documents to make it happen. And for the purpose of the presentation, I limited myself to going from pipelines to a cyclic model and also a human in the loop model. That is important. And the last bit, and that will finish my presentation, is about how a certain merging mechanism is anticipated to operationalize such a standard into real products and services that run on the platform. So let's take a look here. We've just seen a very linear process from sourcing to publishing, and in between you have these steps of normalizing and extracting entities and linking them. But what you would want to have is a parallel world. You want to have possible that once you find certain entities in your document, that it moves into another workflow that is dedicated for that particular entity and knows everything there is about that entity and takes that forward to a more enhanced version of that entity. And that effectively happens on many workflow stages, each having their own human role. So a human in that sense is not limited to picking up a role to contribute to a classic workflow, but you could be diverting your attention to different points in the workflow, operating on different data points with different outcomes and different expectations, depending on which of these workflows you are connected to. So that's also quite exciting, because it doesn't kind of limit a human to only do the things that a machine can't do anymore, but it more empowers a human to move around and be operational in multiple places for different reasons, which is also quite interesting. So the message behind this is think parallel and think of intermediate results moving into other workflows that get their own attention, and the outcome of that in turn can either be recouped back to your original workflow, or it can even extend out to another workflow to progress and fork out to another product. It should all be possible. There should be no linearity or boundary that keeps you captive to a single pattern that you have to pursue. So this is quite an important slide, actually, because this anticipates the dominance of machine learning. So we all know machine learning is creeping in and seeping in on many places, taking over mundane tasks. Some companies are way ahead, and some are still starting to find the opportunity. But you can anticipate that any platform will have a certain degree of machine learning on board. And on the right-hand side, we will have a certain degree of human curation that is happening to oversee that quality is still within limits, and that the quality that the machine learning misses gets compensated and gets adjusted so it doesn't happen again. Certainly, if you're in the business of making products that speak to dosage of drugs or volumes of chemical matter, then obviously a human factor cannot be taken out of the equation. So what this slide wants to tell is that for both the machine learning and the human aided workflows, They both have their own dynamic with respect to the format that you need to interact on, but you want to have a shared vocabulary. You want to have both the human curation on the right and the machine learning experience on the left operate on the same data serialization ultimately. So you want to find a format that caters for both, because you want to be certain that things learned in the left or learned in the right do not get lost in translation because of semantic differences in the way entities are called and the way that formats to entities are shaped with a scheme. So this brings us to the standard. So we've based everything on established standards. So we kind of taken in lots of standards that are out there, all with their own kind of dedicated reason, and we pull them together to make a blend and a framework that picks up the features of certain formats and make a composition of features that we believe is what you're after to model content and to make content a data entity running on a platform. So we arrived at linked data and HTML5. So we believe with these two formats, if you like, so linked data being RDF, we can unite syntax, structure, and semantics. And these are the three pillars that you would want to see in any minimal piece of content in some shape or form. You need to have access to these aspects of content, and that is your base model. So let's just take a look at the technical spec. The content profile link document standard is effectively a JSON LD and an HTML5 document put together. So HTML5 offers a container for harboring JSON LD. So that gives us the access to RDF entities, which effectively is a semantic data layer that you can put on top of your content. The content is the narrative part, so that's the part that a human can read. Machines can read it too, and machines would even prefer a more optimal format, but HTML5 has enough in it to contain features like grouping, like sectioning, like inbuilt divisions class. So there is enough in it, linking, to make the key features available, and HTML5 just happens to be a very low threshold format. So it might not be an obvious choice, but I think the more you get your head around it, it actually does make sense. And as a benefit, you can also treat it as an XML object, so you have the robustness of a scheme that you can enforce where you need it, but you also have the fluidity of a random web page if you needed to pop up on a device, or maybe even devices in the future that we don't even know yet. And the meat of the matter is the bottom part. So there's an XML schema, there's an RDF schema, and a SHACL constrained language that takes control of what shape it is, what purpose it can serve. So these are the ingredients that every user of the content profile standard would have to either make themselves or reuse from somebody else or build on from somebody else as a module. And this is also the part where you can create your own domain model. You can leverage somebody else's domain model, or you can collaborate on a new domain model. It all depends on your use case that you're trying to pursue, but there should not be any kind of limitation or any kind of intellectual property problem that would hamper you. So this is such a document. So we have a cell press article, very traditional, so paragraphs, and within the paragraphs you have all kinds of visual cues that speak to other works or to concepts. There are parts which can be seen as abstracts. It says summary, but machine learning has other ways to determine that this is actually an abstract. At the top you have authors, and each of these concepts are effectively exhibits. They are representations of an entity, and you can match and link entities with your database to find the proper entity, and then you effectively have a representation collection of all those entities pulled together to be a document. So that's the content profile link document standard as such. And how does it get used? Now, this the last remaining uh, part I just want to share on how it actually would run on a platform. And this is a very general blueprint. It's not limited to the company Elsevier. It could be any company. Um, and I think it's a very powerful paradigm because it shows how you can break down an elephant in pieces, and you can containerize things technically and all conceptually quite well. So on the left, you have harvested manuscripts, so that's materials coming in. Then you're expected to normalize it, so you make the outcome become documents that have some kind of shape that resemble a narrative, and then you move into a next space, which is adding semantic detail to it. So you actually qualify the document being an article, or to be an abstract, or to be anything, a patent or a grant. It can be anything that's either the human or the machine or both find out. And then you end up in a next phase, which we call an enriched article. In this case, it could also be an enriched grant or something else. It doesn't matter, but it's effectively an assembly of assertions, so semantic triples that you add to the mix, and then it creates a stack of intelligence added to the document, and making the document light up, if you like, and becoming a genuinely knowledge transfer object, and not so much a bland um, sequence of text. And the last bit is the aggregation into the product. So that's another mechanism of using query languages, which can be many. But what you're doing is you're creating an aggregation on demand, and then you have an article that we consider finished, but it could also be a semi-manufacture or anything else. There's no limitation. So this is the merging bit. This is actually a bit of secret sauce that we have, and I'm willing to share it. Is if you process your documents from raw PDF Word, you would first create a normalized shape. So that's the blue on the left, and then you would push it through many more services, and services that have dedicated obsessive outcomes in mind. So there's one here that wants to find the conclusion. There's another one here that finds the abstract. Another one is only caring about finding authors or the author strings. And once an author string is found, it goes into a dedicated service that tries to find out which author is actually meant, which person is meant, and then it becomes a person and an entity. Um, and I created some visual cues just to make sure that you see that a text suddenly changes into an entity. And then you have this merging principle. Because it's linked data, you can start putting things together like a puzzle. And then the author is not only a person that you know in your database, which has its attributes, but it also happens to have representations that you pulled out of a document. And then you can find authors, and then you know, that author has actually been mentioned in that document that came in last night. And that mechanism is exemplified here, and that's my the final kind of summary is, if you put everything together, your document, as we tend to talk about it, is actually a graph. It's a graph representation, including the fact that some bits and pieces were found to be abstract and conclusions, but also including that some parts of the document were actually speaking to a certain person in the role of an author, represented by a string, and that's external to the document. And I like to emphasize that documents have their own ecosystem. So there are things that are owned by the document, like abstract and conclusion, but there are things not owned by the document, such as authors and organizations. They are elsewhere. They don't belong to the document. So if you kill the document, you don't kill the person and you don't kill the organization. They lead their own lives and they become disconnected from the document. So it's important to understand the distinction between entities that are owned by the document and entities that live outside in their own ecosystem. So this merging, which can happen at all times, at any times, there's no sequence necessarily, but usually what we're now looking at will be the end, because then everything is known and everything is resolved and everything is mergeable. Then you would have a finished product. But if you are a consumer and you are just interested in the abstract and conclusion, then you would be satisfied earlier. Or if you're only interested in distilling authors, then you would be satisfied after that happened, etc. So this is a mechanism that offers all stakeholders the opportunity to trigger early and be content with intermediate results that are more than good enough for a person without having to wait for the final encapsulation and the final aggregation of everything pulled together, because a publisher said that that was the time that you could actually get it all together. So I'm also, in that sense, challenging the existing status quo within Elsevier to adopt a product development attitude that invites contributors, consumers to scientific data to onboard earlier dissemination of information and also partial information, which is not yet complete as we know it today. And that's, I think, a very powerful and important message, both internally to a company like Elsevier, but also to the customer base and stakeholders of Elsevier. So my takeaways for this group is the following: the control. So you are in control of the shape. The way it can interact, how it can be used, and what kind of quality level you want to attach to it. So you should not be dependent on publishers and other service providers that enforce their constraints and limit what you can do. So the content profile standard, in that sense, is should liberate many people and also give them a sense of confidence that if they would engage on that standard, that they have something that can take them a long way without having to worry about dependencies to companies and other similar aspects. Treat content as data, very important. So don't get stuck in your documents. Don't remain captive in your documents. Think of documents being just a coincidental assembly pulled together for the benefit of a human, but otherwise it's just a document. Make your data portable. So I mentioned that you can move it from one place to another, and you should not have to suffer the burden of costly conversions and transformations. We found that the normalization is a very important divider from moving away from existing files to entities, items, and what did I put behind the box? And assertions, yes. So those are the ones that carry on the longest. Those are the ones that have future proofness in them. If you can get your content expressed in those terms, then I think you have achieved a lot. Entity design data, author design data. So the author is just another contributor, but the machine will also become a contributor. Hybrids will start existing. Data and author content will blend in a way that I think we haven't seen before. So that's going to be interesting. And one more takeaway is machine learning is going to be more and more present. It's going to be very pervasive and sometimes even annoying. But I think the researcher who realizes that an alliance is better is probably the researcher that is also ahead of the curve, understanding where to leverage machine learning to your advantage and focus on the bit where the human remains the boss. A content format that supports this, content profiles, I think is very helpful. So that in itself is, I think, a very a useful consideration. On the formats itself, and I'll keep it very small, RDF and XML technology, nothing changes there. They remain in place. So all your investment in time, money, and experience on those schemas and should remain intact. JSON, of course, is everything in the messaging space. If you add the semantic layer, the linked data, you can reuse the JSON, but then suddenly it lights up as being a semantic object as well, next to a very nimble format. So that's a neat feature of JSON LD. It's many developers don't even know that they're processed in JSON LD. They don't even know what linked data is, and they don't have to, which is a great boon because the the learning curve can be quite steep there. And HTML5, well, everybody knows about HTML5, so that's something that is likely to stay for a long time. So I think it's a good. We shouldn't see HTML5 as a jazzy HTML5. Just see HTML5 as a mechanism to keep track of sectioning, grouping, and ordering, and that's all you need from HTML5. So yeah, last point is again just a call out to the working group. And maybe Tid, you thought you have something to share on that, but that's yeah, the contribution we have for the standards organization, and yeah, we're looking forward to seeing content profiles develop and become something for real in the industry. Thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, David.